What is evil? I wrote a poem, and then maybe I'll share some thoughts, if any thoughts come at all. What is evil? The inability to surrender, idolatry, and bending a knee to the wrong God. Who commands the voices of self-doubt and self-hatred? And who would want to see their brother fall, and why? Who thinks freedom is only for the rich? And who can't see the losing bet of holding all treasures on a temporary plane? Could one mistake himself for the Alpha and Omega and not be insane? And yet, in each of us, God does reside, yet still we must surrender to one that is higher if we are to find him there within us. So, who would choose evil here? And who are we to judge? Humanity finding groups running on different cylinders of belief. One calls good evil and evil good. The other flips the equation upside down. And is it true that only the good die young? Only the good die young. What is evil? States of madness, I guess, operating from fear and hatred, the will to subjugate and control. Laziness, procrastination, and self-doubt, a state of no faith, where we are no more than dust and bones temporarily illuminated by living flesh with nothing eternal in sight. And yet, we live so obviously in and amongst a spiritual realm, where we dream each night entire worlds into existence under a universe of stars, full of jungles and creatures so intricate and beautiful and ferocious and terrible that their creator could only be accused of showing off. The beauty of a child lost in make-believe, a pure innocence resounding in love. Where could that come from, if not someplace divine? And beyond all the externals, what about the eternity that lives within each of us? The unchanging consciousness that has witnessed our entire journey here. Is this world of empty distractions being ruled by devices really enough to stop us from forming a relationship with the one that lives within, who gave us this gift of life? Physical death looming for us all is like an invitation to seek immortality within. Death itself is an illusion if our identity can shift from the physical to the spiritual, while we still have time to cultivate the transition. If we can build our kingdom within, or rent to own a room in eternity, by disappearing into presence and witnessing firsthand the love of our Father, a love that is beyond human proportions, where we become unified with forever. External appearances would make it seem that only a few of us are called to come home, or perhaps only a few of us have the wherewithal to actually surrender and allow our tiny egos to die. Nobody thinks it's easy. It's not. But a rational mind can see through the layers of the human predicament and see that all of this is a setup for God calling us home. So who would choose evil? And is evil necessary here to keep us interested? After all, outside of one man, all of us are sinners who came to this conclusion of surrender, and it was our own forays into evil which burned us into seeking eternal love. All of us raised by damaged people in a world with more pitfalls than peaks, where fear's gravitational pull is much deeper than faith's, long before we ever rise to the level of surrender. I'm assuming that evil must be necessary, a necessary aspect in this world's design, or else it wouldn't be so predominant. And did it really all reside from a serpent, a bitten apple, and a woman that was easily manipulated, who then manipulated a man, incidentally? The knowledge of good and evil, why shouldn't we have that knowledge? Apparently, we are too weak to house any kind of judgment at all. That certainly seems to be the case in a world breaking down under the weight of conflict and hatred. It's getting darker all the time. What is evil when it leads so many of us back to love? And why did Satan think he could go up against the one who gave him life? So that's the poem, What is Evil? And it's interesting because a lot of faiths debate this, and I don't really think any of us can. I don't think any human really knows why our world is designed the way it is, why we have these two operating systems working against one another, seemingly, until they unify on some level. And it's only through the dominion of the spiritual realm, or the spirit, or our souls, or presence, or God, that they do unify. Because if we are ego-led, then, and thought-led, and our identity is in this illusionary creation that aided and abetted our survival when we were very young, growing up in all kinds of different traumas and insecurities, and whatever your story is, we all have one. I don't think anybody escapes psychological damage. I mean, it's impossible for parents not to impact their children in negative ways. It's just, it can't happen. Children are unruly beings, and you have to discipline them. And of course, they're going to, even if you're coming from a place of love, you're going to make mistakes. And even if you're coming from a place of love and you make few mistakes, there's going to be tiny traumas along the way. And then, of course, most of us have stories that are much more dramatic than that. So that being that was created out of that is our egoic self, and the thoughts that spin out of it or come from principalities beyond it. I mean, I do have Christian faith and believe our battle is with principalities and not with flesh and blood. So I do believe there is principalities operating also, but they're also operating on a psychology that's already inflicted by the past. And so when our entire identity is stemming from the thoughts just going off in our mind, and conflict, and which it expands into and loves, because it gives its illusionary reality more flesh and blood, it gives its illusionary reality much more life, then I would say that's evil. But evil is this hard word that we put usually on to, I don't even want to say, you know what I mean. Use your imagination. All the most horrific things humans do. But actually, and that's true as well. Obviously, that is horrific. The horrific things humans do. It doesn't. But evil is also more subtle than that, and it can stop you from finding your purpose. And I think that's really the crux of good and evil, is finding your purpose. And we can do that through forgiving everybody and tapping into presence. And tapping into presence as a regular practice until the light of God heals us and lets us clearly sort of set up our foundation in the spirit and in peace, where we have to sort of let go of our self-will, which is very tricky to do at first, especially if you've been operating on self-will and ego for eons. To let that go, it's like letting go of your best friend and worst enemy at the same time. It's the framework of your entire psychological makeup, your entire life, all of your plots and schemes. Who you thought you were has to become no more, and then we can do that through surrender to the Spirit, to God, and then from there, the ego, I think, can sort of recombine with our internal makeup after a period of time and start working in a proper capacity, because it's obviously necessary to have an ego on this material plane. We live in a material plane, or we live on earth. We're not purely, we ultimately are purely spiritual beings, but we are also flesh and blood, and we're also having an experience here that requires things that the ego has. I don't really particularly want to align myself with spirit and God just to sit in a park all day and keep reaching for that eternal bliss. I don't really want to do that. I mean, I do that a lot. I try to do that a lot because I understand that I'm not really going to be able to offer anything unless I do that. At this point, I understand that. I didn't understand that before. I was completely working from the engine of ego, and then the spirit. Not to say all my old work is all ego based. It's really not. I mean, actually, I think some of my earliest songs are some of my best, and they're clearly inspired. And so you have those moments, even when you're framed in the sort of lopsided way of mostly identifying with thoughts and ego. You still tap into presence. It's just not your home. It's not your regular spot. And so, to me, to overcome evil is to overcome my own ego, my own thoughts, and add the ego and the thoughts as the mainstay of my identity, and flip it to where presence is the mainstay of my identity, to where each morning I don't tap into what I'm thinking, start gossiping, doom scrolling and stuff like that, but rather find silence and tap in, do some breath work, say some prayers, asking for wisdom, asking for guidance, and then get on with my day, and then do something like make this video, and then work on some art, work on some music. There's a lot of things to do. And so from the outside looking in, it might seem like, well, I mean, obviously putting yourself out there requires some sort of egoic presence. So you could say, well, look at you, you're in front of a camera talking. That's ego. And sure, ego's participating, but leading me up to this place of being able to do this has been spirit-led. And so to what degree it's spirit versus ego, I don't know. I'm sure it oscillates, and that's fine. I don't really judge it. I kind of can tell when I'm more spirit-based and more ego-based by the level of peace I have. If I'm disturbed even about mundane things or slightly, I know I'm in my head. And the thing is, once you sort of allow the main crux of ego identity to kind of die off, you make a foundation in the kingdom of heaven, if we're going to go Christian, or in peace, or in presence. They really amount to the same thing. If those were, if you don't want to frame it in religious dogma or wording, if that offends you, I have no problem with it. To me, it resonates as the truth. But yeah, if you can build your foundation on the kingdom of heaven, on peace, on presence, then after a time, it takes a while, the ego kind of restores into sanity. You could say God is healing you with his light. You keep tapping into his love. You keep asking for guidance. And there are days when you still go lopsided and all the rest of it. Maybe you take a few steps back. Maybe you sin again. Maybe, things happen. It's life, and we are human. But ultimately, if your foundation is in peace and is in presence, when those things happen, they're instantly identified. Because you're in a clear room, you're in a clear space, mostly as your sort of frame of reference. And so when disturbances come in, it's like right away you see it. And so right away you have your toolkit of how to get back into presence. Am I feeling frustrated with somebody? Could that come bloom into anger, even if they wronged me? It doesn't matter. Or even if I think they wronged me, it doesn't matter. I know to go into Ho'oponopono. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. That's my sort of supercharged forgiveness cheat code, you could say. Not that it's cheating, but it just reminds me that I'm responsible for everything in my field of consciousness. That if I have a problem with somebody, if I'm judging or condemning someone, that's going to do nothing but keep me out of presence and bolster the ego, who is not ever needing to drive my car. I need God to drive my car, and the ego can be the co-pilot. I need spirit to drive my car and presence to drive my car, and I can be the co-pilot. And then ask him, hey boss, what do you want me to do? And then I feel like my work is actually more fun. more energized, less vulnerable to procrastination, and yeah, just a kind of a flow. So it's interesting because the ego gets uncovered as an imposter, because he's like going, listen to me, here's what you got to do, blah blah blah, and then this will happen, and then that will happen, and then it gets disappointed when that doesn't happen, and then it procrastinates and gets depressed and gets emotional and reaches for addictions, and then you shame spiral, and then you're lost. It's so easy to get lost. I mean, and we need guidance from, we need the guidance of spirit. We need the guidance of God. We need the guidance of light and love. We live in a kooky world where you can write a poem about what is evil and everybody kind of knows what you're talking about. The greatest trick the devil ever played was making you believe that he's not real, and he is real. And the principalities that he employs are real. And there is a spiritual battle going on here, and it's kooky and interesting and woo-woo and wacky, but also it's just obvious. It's also just rational. It's just blatant. So, I don't know. It's interesting. Why does it happen? I have no clue. Absolutely. Other than I could say, potentially, I feel like this is some kind of testing ground for us to cultivate our relationship with the eternal while we're here, because when the physical death happens, we've cultivated this relationship with the eternal, and then we go beyond this mortal coil, and we have remain in that same relationship and become perhaps permanently unified with the Father, back to the Father. We already are unified, but without the duality of the ego there as well, trying to usurp our identity. And the gurus and the enlightened masters all speak about this non-dualistic state, where you're just pure being, where they say death isn't real, I'm dead already, I've lived forever. I mean, they all have different ways of framing it, but it's all the same thing. So it's really interesting. But anyway, there it is. That is what is evil, and I hope you get something out of that. Until next time, peace.